Hello number ones, welcome back to my channel. This is the Metatron speaking, and today we've got a very interesting question. So we all know the story of the Viking raiders attacking, for example, Lindisfarne, attacking Anglo-Saxon England, raiding, pillaging, plundering. So from 793 to 1066 we have got the so-called Viking Age. All of this raiding happened, and we know that it didn't only happen in the British Isles, it also happened with the siege of Paris. So the question that we've got today is, the medieval church was obviously aware of what the Norsemen were doing. The raid of the monastery of Lindisfarne in 793 is probably one of the most iconic, and for all of you who have watched the TV series Vikings, of course, it's very, very famous. Although in the TV series Vikings, they do make it look as if the Norse just happened to arrive, to land in an area nearby where the monastery was, so off the Northumbrian coast, even though most likely they knew precisely that the monastery was there. They probably had heard of the monastery. In my opinion, it was a surgical strike, if you will. And besides, the monastery was founded in 634 by the Irish monk Aidan. We also know from the Domesday Stone that some people survived the raid at Lindisfarne and spoke about it. The church obviously knew. There are a lot of accounts of Catholic voices and spokesmen, monks, the priesthood in general, speaking very badly, and we can understand why, about the Norse. So if the church was aware of what the Norse were doing in Christian land, why not organizing a full-on crusade to the Nordic countries to make all these heathens pay? To answer this question properly, there are a lot of things that we need to look at, from a political standpoint, from an economical standpoint, from a religious standpoint. But before doing that, I'd like to mention the sponsor that made this video possible, Viking Jewelry, and the special offer that they have got for you today. Now, as you know, I own quite a lot of rings and necklaces from Viking Jewelry. I really like the stuff that they make, the stuff that they produce, and they are now offering a end of the year special offer for Yule and Christmas at the same time, if you will. If you want to take advantage of this special offer, make sure to use my special code META35 for 35% off during the first 48 hours on the Thor's Hammer collection, and the special code META20 for a 20% off during the first 10 days on the whole store. You will find both links in the description below. And big thanks to Viking Jewelry for sponsoring this video. Alright, back on our topic. First, the obvious point. The first crusade happens in 1095, well, 1096, 1099. There also is an unofficial crusade. Perhaps I'll speak more about that on a different video. Although I have spoken, I do have a video dedicated to the crusades. But we do know that now we are a little too early in time. I mean, if we look at the reasons why Pope Urban II started the first crusade in the Holy Land, there is a religious justification for it. But the reasons are political, strategical, and military. And also, you had the conditions so that something like that could take place. The Britain that the Norse, the Danes, were raiding was not a unified country. Mercia, Wessex, and by the way, Wessex had already had a pretty difficult first encounter with the Vikings prior to Lindisfarne. States that are already fighting a lot of inner war, plus the invaders. And in fact, as a History with Hilbert, an excellent fellow historical channel, eloquently pointed out on his dedicated video about the Vikings and the Norse, when the men of Wessex tried to take York from the Danes, the local Anglo-Saxon bishop sides with the heathen army, which already tells you a lot into the sort of inner struggle that were present and were happening at the time. Also, you have to imagine that the Middle East, Jerusalem, was a lot easier to sell to the general public for the church. Of course, because it was the birthplace of Jesus Christ, the holiest place on earth, and so it makes sense that Christendom easily sold the idea of, we have the right to go there and take control and take it off the hands of Islam. And we also have to consider that Islam was advancing. It was a menace for the rest of Europe. Also, the Crusader kingdoms that will be born and founded because of the Crusades were quite rich. It was a way to make money. Going to Scandinavia, on the other hand, Scandinavia, or the Nordic countries, as I should say, were not as resourceless as many people try to make them seem, but they weren't particularly rich in resources either, hence the Norse going on Vikings. So it wouldn't have been easy for the church to pinpoint the Norse, the Vikings, as enemies to all of Christendom, mostly because, of course, if you speak to the Anglo-Saxons that were raided and murdered, or to the Irish, for example, or a specific Irish group that was attacked and lost women because of what the Norse did, then yes, of course, they would have hated them. But then other groups, for example, probably traded with them, and successfully as well. So imagine that you were an Irish man who was selling slaves to the Norse and making a good deal of money. As far as you're concerned, yeah, the Norse, they might be a little weird, but they pay well, so I have no problems with them. Also, try to sell the idea of demonic Norsemen to someone like the Byzantine Empire that actually recruited the Norsemen as bodyguards. So as far as they're concerned, no problems with the Norse. It wasn't as easy to depict them as a common enemy. But most importantly, I think the main reason why the church did not decide to retaliate with a holy crusade is because at the end of the day, even though movies try to depict this very distinct line of division between the heathens, the pagans, and the Christians, we have to consider that historically speaking, a lot of Norsemen became Christians. For example, in 871, we have a very famous heathen army called the Summer Army that was joining the Great Dane army that was already conquering territories around Britain. And this army was led by King Guthrum. It's a very important warrior king of the Norse, who was obviously a pagan, and he will have quite a series of battles in the local territories. But I think the most poignant battle that I'd like to bring up for our discussion today is the Battle of Edington of 878. This is the battle where King Alfred manages to defeat King Guthrum of the Norse, and after this defeat, King Guthrum converts to Christianity. He is baptized and becomes a Christian, taking also on a Christian name, or the Christian name of Athelstan. Now, we do know that from a historical perspective, Christianity was spread by the sword and by the book. Now, in this case, of course, you could say, well, yeah, but they defeated them in battle, so obviously it was spread by the sword in this case, which is kind of true, but I'd like to propose a sort of little different reading. I'm not saying that I've got all the truth, of course, so feel free to disagree and let me know what you think in the comments below. Consider this as me telling you my own interpretation and opinion, very open to hear what you guys think. But in my opinion, I think King Athelstan's conversion was real. Let me justify that. There were a lot of advantages for joining Christianity at this period in time. Economical advantages, political advantages, even military advantages. At the end of the day, practical advantages. From a trade standpoint, if you are a Christian trader at this time and you're trading with another Christian trader, you'll make sure to give him some good deals. But if you're trading with someone who's not a Christian, then you're not going to be as generous with the sort of trade. So that makes sense that perhaps some Vikings that were trading rather than plundering, as some did, maybe would wear a cross and pretend to be Christians while they were trading with the Christians, and then remove the cross and put on the symbol of Thor when they were among themselves, because that actually gave some real practical advantages during trading. Christian wealth was very much craved by the Norse. And if you think about it, sure, you can plunder and raid, but then, as you can see, some battles you will win, some battles you will lose. Instead, if you become a Christian, you sort of partake of that wealth. It's an easier way to gain access to Christian wealth. So this is a sort of a monetary advantage. Think about it. Christianity is monotheistic. One of the characteristics of monotheism is the fact that there is only one God, my God, your gods are false. The Norse religion instead was polytheistic. They were already used to the idea of there are many gods. Now, given it could be that some Norse, when they were looking at the Christian god, they thought, oh, that's a false god, that doesn't exist. But it could also be that a way that they looked at the Christian god was, oh yeah, another god, but he's weak. Thor is stronger, Odin is stronger because we are winning in battle, and Jesus Christ is not as strong as Thor because they're losing. But what happens when they win? So this is why, coming back to King Athelstan, one of the reasons I say that maybe he really did convert is because from his point of view, again, he's a polytheistic religious person. He believes already there are many gods, and maybe he's looking at Jesus Christ as sort of a weaker god. But the moment that the Christian army defeats his own army and he's at the mercy of these Christian leaders, and they, instead of slaughtering their entire family, they say, join the Christian faith, given, or we will slaughter. I mean, we don't know. Maybe they did that. Most likely there was a condition. Maybe he looked at it thinking, maybe this Jesus Christ is a strong warrior god. And the idea of selling Jesus Christ as a warrior god, I know it might sound strange from our modern perspective, because when we imagine of Christianity, we think of peace and love. But medieval Christianity was anything but peace and love. I mean, sure, yeah, they were preaching that as well. But you have to imagine that they had no problems justifying their holy crusades. I mean, Charlemagne was not really into peace and love, was he? It was all about sword and conquest. And if you think about it, if you were to read the Bible to a Norse, well, if you read the Old Testament, it's all about war and conquest. It's all about Yahweh being a warrior god. In fact, he's even called the Lord of Hosts. He is leading the chosen people into war against other people for territorial control. That's something that a Norse population would understand very well. And given, some people might say, yeah, but with the Gospels, Jesus Christ brings peace. And yet, there are famous scriptures like the one that says, I'm not here to bring peace, but I will bring sword. And if you read the book of Revelations, for example, to the Norse population, well, there is a lot of Michael and angels and war in heaven against the dragon, subduing combat. So I wouldn't be surprised if, when we consider the fact that a lot of Norse were converted by the book, they kind of adapted it. Because of course, if you speak about incarnation, if you speak about the body of Christ, like the Catholic principle of the bread turning into the actual body of Christ, these would have been weird for them to accept. If you maybe even Trinity up to a certain point, the concept of the original sin would have been foreign, but they just don't preach these, and perhaps start by preaching the warlike part of the Bible. And I think that the Norse wouldn't really have that much of a problem to think, yeah, let's add one more warrior god into the pantheon we already have, which is probably how many did first. Harald Bluetooth, king of the Kingdom of Denmark in 975, will declare himself Christian, but he will also declare the entirety of Denmark Christian. And I think that this is the key factor that sort of prevented the church, as we reach the era of the Crusades, to decide to actually call a crusade against the Nordic countries and against Scandinavia, because by that time Scandinavia was basically becoming completely Christian. Also, the official status of, for example, Danish or Norse kings, as they become Christians, is exalted. You will have churches and monasteries. Monasteries have got monks, bishops, archbishops. They're all literate. That's another advantage. It's easier to trade, it's easier to communicate, and bishops oftentimes were actually quite good military advisor and political advisor to have. So joining Christianity had some real advantages, and that's why many Norse decided to do it. And of course, as the generation go on, this idea of believing both the old gods and the new god gravitated more and more towards the actual monotheistic Christianity, although that of course took some time. But as the new generations are born into it, then they probably start looking at the beliefs of their fathers as something old and ancient. So generally speaking, to sort of finish it off, I'd like to say that there were obviously material reasons, economical reasons, political reasons, strategic reasons, and maybe in some cases even spiritual reasons for which the Norse decided to join Christianity. And because this happened on a large scale, that's probably one of the reasons why they weren't seen as the enemy anymore or as invaders anymore. It was instead a great sort of success or missionary success that they can boast of and gloat about, which is probably one of the reasons why we never really had a crusade to take place in those lands. But that finishes our video for today. I hope that you enjoyed it. If you did, please remember thumbs up, and if you're not yet members of this community, become a noble one. Subscribe to my channel for more content from the Metatron. Also remember the special offer from Viking Jewelry. You'll find links in the description below. Don't miss out. A lot of amazing stuff is waiting there for you. And remember, the Metatron has spread his wings. Goodbye.